Okay, I think we can start now. Welcome everyone to our community call on the Immunify Discord server. Today we will be joined by Robert Miller, product manager at Flashbots. We will talk about MEV, minor extractable value, and Flashbots. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much. Really excited to be here and excited for the conversation.
Can you introduce yourself? How did you start in this space?
I'm Robert Miller. I lead product at Flashbots. I have been a long time tinkerer, is the way that I would frame it. So I've been building software for a long time, no formal training, but just tinkering with things that interest me, building things that interest me, and really early on got involved with crypto. 2011 or so, I found Bitcoin and have been around the space ever since. In about 2016, I started to work with Ethereum and smart contracts after seeing some of the action that was happening with the DAO. And it was about, I think, 2019, 2020, where I started being more involved with what was going on in DeFi, in particular, kind of building with some of the primitives, making smart contracts, being a participant in the ecosystem. And through kind of that experience with doing a bunch of stuff on chain, with developing, I learned a lot firsthand about MEV, or Maximal Extractable Value, and its problems. So when Flashbots was launched last year, I immediately, the mission really resonated with me because I had been a participant in the space, and I joined the team very early on, shortly after that, where these days I lead Flashbot's overall product and am a steward. So that's like a short introduction to me and how I found myself, where I am now.
Sure, thank you. And can you introduce us a little bit into MEV and Flashbots? You said maximal extractable value, but when I was reading the docs, was minor extractable value. So, what are the real concept around there?
Yeah. So, MEV as an idea started with miners and started with Ethereum specifically. And it refers to the value that can be made from transaction ordering, insertion, or censorship. So MEV, as it was minor extractable value, started to be studied with DEXs on Ethereum, with Phil's seminal paper, Flashbots 2.0. And that paper studied one form of MEV, which is arbitrage between different decentralized exchanges. So if you have an asset on two different decentralized exchanges where there's different prices, you could buy at a low price on one and sell at a high price on another and make some money. And kind of the insight behind MEV is that the party that is sequencing transactions, so in Ethereum, that's the miner, is the party that ultimately can and should be capturing the profit that can be made from things like arbitrage on Ethereum. So this was started and began being studied in the context of Ethereum with miners. These days, Flashbots is trying to put forward the meme of maximal extractable value because MEV exists in other types of systems too. So in proof of stake Ethereum, which is coming, hopefully this year, we will switch miners out for validators, but MEV will still exist in ETH2 as well, and we can talk about that a little bit later. So, minor extractable value doesn't really make sense in that context since there aren't miners, but we still wanted to keep the MEV meme alive. So Flashbots calls it maximal extractable value. It's basically the same thing as minor extractable value, and it refers to the money that could be made from transaction ordering, basically. I think this is important because MEV provides people an incentive to use the chain and sometimes a large monetary incentive. So if there aren't efficient ways to extract MEV, then people do things like spam the chain. They will flood the mempool. They can even take blockchains down completely, like what you saw with Solana a couple weeks ago, where it's unusable because the amount of activity that people are making to try to capture MEV. So MEV provides large financial incentives to use chains, and if if that activity is not sort of funneled in the right way, and if it's not efficient, then there are really bad negative externalities. And Flashbots, as an organization, was formed to study MEV, to look at it long term, to try to understand it better, and mitigate any of the negative externalities and maybe even some of the existential risks that MEV could pose to public blockchains. So that's a brief intro. Happy to dig into any of that if you like, Pepin.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, for example, one of the utilities doing a minor extractable or maximal extractable value was to reorder the transactions on the mempool, right?
Yeah, that is one thing. So Flashbots began with the mission of giving access to anyone to be able to order transactions in the way that a miner could, right? So miners before were the only parties that had this unilateral ability to order transactions. And we thought that this could be problematic and centralizing if there were kind of bespoke and close relationships between miners and trading firms. So Flashbots created this marketplace for transaction ordering. And what that means is on one side of the marketplace, anyone can submit their preferred ordering of transactions in what we call bundles of transactions. And those bundles of transactions get sent to miners where an auction is run at the miner for who is allocated that block space and who's ordering a transactions gets mined. So this does two things. Number one, it democratizes access to MEV because now instead of being a miner or having relationships with large miners, being the prerequisite to being able to capture some forms of MEV, anyone can submit a Flashbots bundle with their transaction ordering preferences. And second, any miner can plug into the Flashbots auction, receive bundles, and optimize their transaction ordering. So you don't need to be large and sophisticated in order to make MEV as a miner, thanks to Flashbots. You just need to run software and listen to bundles. So it drastically lowered the barriers to entry for MEV for both users who want to submit transaction ordering preferences and miners who want to make MEV. So it keeps MEV open, it keeps MEV permissionless and democratic. And to your point in your question, one of the things that you can do is you can listen to transactions in Ethereum's mempool and use those as a part of the bundles that you're submitting to miners. So maybe you see someone else making a large trade on a decentralized exchange that's going to move prices a lot, and you want to insert your arbitrage directly behind them. That's an example bundle of what you could do with both a mempool transaction and your own with Flashbots and submit it to this auction that I was just talking about.
Thank you. So how this bundle of transactions appears on the network? Because as I understand, there is not a mempool or something like that regarding to transactions on Flashbots, right?
Yeah, you are right. So part of what's important here is that Flashbots offers a direct-to-miner relay for communicating your transactions and in your ordering preferences. And the reason why that's important is that if these transactions were public, then other people could see your arbitrage or see your MEV extraction and try to steal it from you in what's called generalized front running. So if you observed me trying to arbitrage and make some profit, you could just replace my address with your own and steal that MEV for yourself. So Flashbots does not send transactions to the public mempool. Instead, it sends them directly to the miner where they're not propagated to the network and where you can't be front run. This is kind of a core part of the other major product at Flashbots, which is called Flashbots Protect. And what that is it's an RPC endpoint that you can put within your wallet where your transactions are not sent to the mempool. Instead, they're sent to Flashbots, where we directly send them on to miners after that. So you can trade on Ethereum without your transactions being public until they're included in blocks. And the reason why that's valuable is if you're trying to make a DEX trade, for example, you could be front run or sandwiched and lose money if your transaction goes to the mempool. But again, Flashbots transactions don't go to the mempool, so they're never seen by hungry sandwich bots. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you very much. So, part of that case, what are the other uses of Flashbots?
So I think that there are a couple things that I want to highlight here. So first, if you are a regular user and you want your transactions protected for front-running purposes, you should use Flashbots because again, our transactions don't go to the public mempool. Second, if you are a regular user and you want priority within blocks, you should also use Flashbots because Flashbots bundles are placed at the top of blocks. So that's another big benefit of using Flashbots is your transaction would be mined at the top of the block if you win the auction. I think third, Flashbots is super useful if you have some really specific ordering of transactions that you need. So a lot of traders use this for things like arbitrage or liquidations, but in general, if you have any specific ordering of like multiple transactions that you need, you can use Flashbots to get that mined on chain. Lastly, there's some cool, like a little bit more futuristic stuff around gas sponsoring. So with Flashbots, you can pay for another transaction's priority fees with your own. So you could have one account that doesn't have Ether, use another account to transfer Ether in, and another account to pay for the priority fee of that transaction too. So it's backdoor account abstraction, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, you kind of lost me right there. So you can pay the gas for a transaction about other users sending the transaction?
Yeah, so imagine that you have USDC in your account and you want USDT Tether, but you don't have any Ether. With Flashbots, what you could do is on a different account B, you could send Ether in one transaction to the account with USDC, then make your trade USDC to Tether, and use the Ether that you just sent in to pay for the base fee. And in a third transaction, with the account that had Ether, pay for the priority fee of the whole bundle of transactions. And these three transactions can all be sent together and mined together at one time as well. So in this way, you can sponsor transactions from account A with account B using a Flashbots bundle, which is kind of like account abstraction. It's something we want in Ethereum in other contexts that you can approximate with a little bit of complexity with Flashbots. Was that helpful?
Yeah. Very interesting. Thank you. So, there are any prerequisites to start working with Flashbots?
There are not. So anyone can submit bundles to us. Anyone can use Flashbots. Anyone can extract MEV using our system or use us for front-running protection. It's very important to us that we are open. So yeah. If you are a miner, you can fill out our form also and get onboarded to Flashbots.
And about starting to build a Flashbot, what will be the requisites for any dev to trying to extract the value?
So you need some programming skills. You probably need to know, JavaScript or Python, and you need to have an MEV strategy in mind. So, you need to know, you need to have a unique take on arbitrage, for example, or have a unique take on liquidations. Um, and those I think, are the two important things. You need to be able to program in like some language to write your bot, and then you need to have a strategy in mind. And that's all you really need to get started.
Thank you. We started to talk about it early, but we didn't finish about what will happen to MEV after Ethereum 2.0.
Um, what happens with MEV in Ethereum 2.0 is validators will receive MEV rewards instead of miners. Largely, the system works in the same way with a little bit of difference. But the main difference is that if you are an Ethereum staker or a validator, you will receive MEV instead of miners. And that's the most important difference. But MEV will still exist, and Flashbots will still exist in ETH2 as well.
Okay, thank you. And regarding the security area, can you explain our users why people shouldn't test vulnerabilities on public chains?
Uh, yeah, so I think one of the reasons is that there are really sophisticated bots that will watch for the mempool, and within the mempool, try to front run transactions that they see that they can make money from. So, for example, if you found a vulnerability that let you make Ether within a protocol, and you sent a transaction to the public mempool, it's pretty likely that a generalized front runner, this really sophisticated copycat bot, would see your transaction and copy it, except with itself being the recipient of funds and a higher gas price. So in that way, you are having your exploit be discovered and copied by another bot. And it's likely that these parties are also monitoring the transactions that they're front running as well, right? So someone else automatically notices that your transaction is something that they can copy, that they can submit themselves, and they'll likely get an alert that says, okay, hey, I successfully copied a transaction here, go and check it out. You're essentially alerting a third party to what the vulnerability is that you've found, and probably multiple third parties as well. So that's what I would say from an MEV and Flashbots perspective is the reason why you shouldn't be testing for vulnerabilities on public chains.
And how Flashbots should change the way people think about bugs?
So before Flashbots, it was very difficult to ensure that you got multiple different transactions mined in a specific order. And you could kind of make assumptions about transaction ordering that weren't true before. So, for example, you could assume that a EOA wasn't going to be able to make 6 transactions in a row to perform like 6 different actions that would lead to a bad outcome for a protocol. But with Flashbots, you can chain together multiple different transactions to the point, of arbitrary different length. And that means that you need to be thinking about bugs and vulnerabilities in a different way, right? You can't just assume that EOAs can't make multiple different actions together. You need to be thinking deeply about what happens if someone has power over transaction ordering? What happens if someone can insert other people's transactions into their own? What happens if people can censor transactions? So in general, I think that given the existence of flashbots, people should think much harder about transaction ordering, and people should think much harder about like what happens if people could have access to arbitrary length of bundles of transactions.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, yeah, I was rethinking about because, for example, it's not the same reordering, like bundling transactions than submitting a transaction with different, calling different functions, right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, for example, when you said in the bundling the transactions, you can submit like a bunch of different contracts at the same time, right?
Yeah, that's one thing that you could do, yeah.
Okay, okay. So we have a lot of questions on the chat section. Well,
Let me see. I didn't know there was
yeah,
a chat. Let's
yeah. Event
find
channel.
it.
Yeah, I will tag you.
Yeah, okay. So how do we write a Flashbot or use it? So I would check out the Flashbots GitHub repo. We have some public bots that are open source that you could that you know you could look at for examples of how you can write bots. You basically need a strategy. You need to be able to pull data off of the chain. You need to be able to create transactions and submit them. That's like all you need. And prior to Flashbots, people would do arbitrage in the same way as they would
The Flashbots.
I'm sorry, in just in the public mempool. So if you had an arbitrage transaction, you would fire it off in the mempool with a really high gas price and hope that it landed and that no one else saw it before. And what this eventually led to is that people would be watching the public mempool, and if they saw someone else competing for the same arbitrage opportunity, they would up their gas price to be above that person. And in response, someone else would see that they're in a competition for an arbitrage opportunity, and they would up their gas price. And then in response, the person before ups their gas price. So you had these escalating gas price wars called priority gas auctions, where people would send lots of transactions to the mempool on really low latency, trying to, be the transaction that had the highest gas price possible. And that's like largely how MEV extraction and arbitrage happened before. So there's a comment here about Solana validators. The reason why Solana was DDoSed had to do with the way that they were processing transactions and duplicate transactions. So it's like about their computing model and kind of how the Solana blockchain works. And Ethereum validators can be DDoSed too, but not in the same way as what happened to Solana. So I'm just going to run down these questions. Actually, Mohammed says, aha, I get it. The gas price is what determines the priority. So yeah, you're right. The gas price is what determines the priority. The person that pays the highest gas price would be mined at the top of the block. And the Flashbots auction, to answer your question around like where the auction's running, happens at the miner. So the miner is running software, and that software listens to all of the bundles that people send through Flashbots. And that software tries to optimize for the miner's overall revenue. So when you submit a bundle, you are participating in an auction for block space. And the person who pays the most in the auction gets included on chain. So that auction happens at the miner software level. The way that people receive transactions and the way that we send them to the validator, just like continuing on with your questions, Mohammed, is we have open lines of communication and API endpoints with miners. So, we have a trusted relationship with them and we know all the miners. They allow us to send those transactions directly. The reason why nobody can run MEV Geth client for this is that we only send transactions to specific miners that we validated our actual miner pools. So there is some trust in the system today, and it at least on the miner side, it's not permissionless. You have to be a mining pool and you have to have been a mining pool for a little bit of time to get private transactions. So that's how we stop front running. I don't know, Mohammed, about the Adidas NFT. You could figure it out. And if you looked at the chain, but I really don't know. I didn't follow that one. You can look at the mempool from Etherscan like that, yeah, or there are some products that help you look at the mempool too. So BlocksRoute and Block Native are two ways, or you can run your own Ethereum node and see the mempool. Those are all options. And then Tom InfoSec writes, what about sandwich attacks on L2? So this is kind of interesting. Sandwich attacks on L2 are really only possible if there is a mempool on that L2. But if you're using a system like Arbitrum or Optimism where there's no mempool and you're just sending transactions directly to the sequencer, then there are not any sandwich attacks, because the sandwich attack requires someone to see your transaction while it's in the process of getting included in the network, before it's included, while it's pending. And if they do that, they can use a higher gas price than you and get in front of you, and then land an arbitrage or land a back run after you. But that's not possible if transactions go directly to the sequencer on L2. So they are possible if there's a mempool. If there's not, sandwich checks do not happen. Yeah, that is all of the questions. I think I answered them all. Feel free to type some more, folks. I'll stay around a little bit. Boring SSL says, is there any real-world story to white hat a hack using Flashbot? And yeah, so actually there have been many white hat hack rescues. White hat hack, using this to, or using Flashbots to perform a white hat hack to rescue user funds. That has happened before. We also do white hat rescues of compromised user funds all the time using Flashbots as well. So someone's MetaMask will be compromised and we'll help them get some assets out. I think most recently, with regard to the white hat hacking using Flashbots, DYDX saved a boatload of user funds and they used a Flashbots bundle to do it. And before that, after that, Gelato was running a back-running Flashbots bot to help save user funds as well. So those are two examples of some white hat hacks that have happened. And yeah, there's another really good story that has happened that you can see there in the chat. Any other questions, folks? Yeah, you can bug me on Twitter. I don't know. I get a lot of Twitter messages, so I will try to reply, but I can't guarantee that I will, but you can try, certainly. Cool. Thanks for having me, Pepin.
Thank you too for sharing us all this information.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of your weekend, everybody. Cheers.
Same. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.